Hello, it's Lady Boulay, and welcome back to Black American Lineage. Thank you for your support. Thank you for supporting this channel as actively as you do. And today, we're going to journey back to the past and talk about the difference between the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. Both of these were very important wars that were fought here on American soil, but they were fought for different purposes. For the longest time, I got them confused. So it's probably somebody else out there who gets them confused too. So I want to talk about the differences between these two wars. The Revolutionary War was fought first. It was also called the American War of Independence. This is the war in which the first president of the United States, George Washington, was the general in command of the armed forces. They called themselves Patriots, Sons of Liberty, and Bluecoats. The Revolutionary War was fought from April 19th, 1775 to September 3rd, 1783. It was a battle between the American Patriots and the British Army. The reason for the war is the reason for all wars. It's for power and resources. So in plain English, the British, which was the most powerful empire in the world in 1775, had control over the 13 colonies that eventually became the United States of America. The 13 colonies were Europeans, white people, who had left Europe and come to the New World, as the 13 colonies were called, and settled here. Now we know the indigenous people that we call Indians were already here. They fought the Indians for their land. That fight went on until 1923. So the indigenous people put up a real fight, but eventually the Europeans, the white people, won. But the white people, the settlers, they were under the control of the British. So once they got settled here and pretty much beat the Indians off, they started building the country up. The British, back in England, wanted them to pay taxes back to England. So they were calling that taxation without representation, because they didn't have anybody in the British Parliament representing them. But the British Parliament was making laws that affected them over here in the colonies, and all of those laws had to do with them sending money back to England. So England had the power, even though the people had come over here and fought and were building the country, but the British was in control of them. Now we remember that who also were here were the Native Americans that we call Indians and the enslaved people. So all of them were here, but the British were running the show. At a point, the colonists got angry because they had built their own country and they wanted to govern their own country, and they did not want laws coming from Britain, and they did not want to pay any more taxes. So when they sent all that tea over here, because they were sending stuff over here for them to buy, and then they had to send the money and the taxes back to England. So at a point, the colonists said, this is it. We're not going to let them control us anymore. But the British called their bluff and sent shiploads of tea to several of the ports. In Charleston, they seized the tea and wouldn't let it leave the boat. In New York and Philadelphia, they turned the ships around and sent them back to England. But in Boston, they threw the tea overboard. And the British were like, oh, no, you didn't. And they sent their army and their navy to the New World, sent them over here to fight, to bring them back under control. And that is what the Revolutionary War was about. The British had red uniforms, so they were called the Redcoats. And the Patriots, the ones of them that had uniforms at all, were blue. Now, it has to be noted that most of them were not even trained soldiers. They were just farmers and merchants and people who wanted their freedom from the British. But what they had in their favor was that they knew the geography of the land, and the British did not. And who helped them with the geography of the land were the enslaved people that I talked about in another video. Now, the patriots, the Sons of Liberty, the colonists, whatever we call them, beat the British in the Revolutionary War. They won their independence from England, but the enslaved people stayed in slavery. That is the irony of the Revolutionary War. Those European people that had come here and taken this land from the indigenous people and had forced Africans here from their homeland and was holding them here in bondage against their will. They wanted their freedom from the British, and they fought and won their freedom from the British. But the enslaved people remained in slavery, and they continued to fight the indigenous people for their land. So when they fight to keep American history from being taught, this is what they're fighting against. They don't want this told. So the Revolutionary War was a war in which the American colonies fought to win their independence from England, which is also known as Great Britain. Now to the Civil War. The Civil War began 78 years after the Revolutionary War ended. The Civil War is also called by other names. It's called the War Between the States and the War of Northern Aggression. It began on April 12, 1861 and ended on May 26, 1865. People are still passionate about that war, especially in the South. Now, they will tell you that the war was not over slavery, but everybody knows that it was. There was a dispute over whether or not slavery should be expanded into states beyond the South. There were those who wanted to extend slavery into Kansas and those who did not. And they had a bloody confrontation over that. But the whole thing was that slavery had gone on in this country for 246 years. On March the 2nd of 1807, the House and Senate agreed on a bill called the Act to prohibit the importation of slaves into any port or place within the jurisdiction of the United States from and after the first day of January in the year of our Lord 1808. So the Congress had passed a bill in 1807 saying they were not to bring any more slaves into the United States after January the 1st, 1808. But they did not abide by this law, and they continued to go into Africa, having villages raided and forcing those people into slavery. Because slavery was extremely lucrative. They were making money hand over fist with the cotton and the sugar cane and the tobacco and the rice, and the enslaved people were working those crops. It was making white people rich. In the 1800s, the wealth was in the South. It was not in the North. It was not in California. It was in Natchez, Mississippi, and down here in the South. So they did not want to end slavery, and they were willing to put everything on the line for slavery. So it always comes back to money and power. And there was also the case, just like in the Revolutionary War, taxation without representation. They had these enslaved people down here, counting them as the population of the South, but they were not paying any taxes for the slaves. So they went back and reduced the enslaved people to less than a whole person. So every 5 people counted for 3 people. So that's how they reduced them. Abraham Lincoln was elected President of the United States in 1860, a Republican. The Republican Party began as the Anti-Slavery Party. So the feeling was that Abraham Lincoln was elected to end slavery. The slave-holding states in the South became furious, and they decided, we're just going to leave the United States of America and form our own country. And that's what they did. They left the United States and formed their own country called the Confederate States of America. And this was because they were determined to hold on to those enslaved people. And just like the British wanted to force the colonists to bend to their will, the Confederate States of America wanted the United States of America to bend to their will, leave them alone, and let them continue the slave system. That's what many historians say, and that is what I believe. So they were willing to fight to hold on to those enslaved people. And on April the 12th of 1861, the Confederates started the war by firing on Fort Sumter, which was a fort that belonged to the United States of America. So they started the war. They really thought that they could beat the Union Army. They started out really well, but they didn't win. And again, just like they had to do during the Revolutionary War, black people had to get involved in this war. Harriet Tubman, who we remember from freeing slaves through the Underground Railroad, was a spy in the Union Army. And other black women were spies, and black men fought valiantly in that war. They knew they had to fight in that war if they wanted to be free. After the Civil War ended, it was then and only then were the enslaved people freed. So that's the difference between the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. The Revolutionary War was fought because the European settlers who had come here and taken the land from the Indians wanted their independence from Great Britain. So they fought the Revolutionary War. And during the Civil War, that was the war between the states that was fought to end slavery. So that is the difference between those wars. Now, this is just a summary of it. There are a lot of other details, but this is the major difference between these two wars. If you have questions about this, leave them in the comment section, and I will do my best to answer them. Thank you for listening. As always, subscribe to the channel, give me a thumbs up, leave a comment, share the video, and as always, have a great day.